Welcome back to the Discovery Podcast. From the vinyl disc to the compact disc, we discover the greatest artists, albums, and songs of the classic rock era. I'm Eric Senich. It's a double episode weekend of Discovery. Tomorrow, an episode devoted entirely to the classic Rolling Stones song released in the summer of 1965, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. But today we have a special guest. It's photographer Mark Weiss, who has a brand new book out. If you're a fan of 80s rock, then this is the book to have in your collection. Mark's on the podcast to tell us about the book, share some stories from it, and more. So let's get right to it. Here is Mark Weiss. The book is called The Decade That Rocked, the photography of Mark Weissguy Weiss, written by Richard Bienstock, forward by Rob Halford of Judas Priest, afterword by Eddie Trunk with contributions from Daniel Siwick. A 376-page book, never before or rarely seen photos of legends like Van Halen, Ozzy Osbourne, Aerosmith, Mötley Crüe, Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Bon Jovi, Kiss, countless others. Exclusive interviews, too, with Ozzy Osbourne, Dee Snider, Nikki Sixx of Mötley Crüe, Aerosmith's Joe Perry, Rob Halford, and many more recall their memories of the era-defining decade. Plus, you get to relive Mark's unbelievable journey through rock history, from getting arrested for selling photos outside of a Kiss concert to touring with legends like Van Halen to shooting Bon Jovi's infamous Slippery When Wet cover, shooting backstage at Live Aid with Black Sabbath, and much, much more. The book is available now through the decadethatrocked.com. That's the decadethatrocked.com. And stopping by the Discovery Podcast to talk about the book is the man himself, Mark Weiss. Mark, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate it, Eric.
Yeah, well, congratulations on the book, man. It's already getting some great reviews, a bunch of 5-star reviews on Amazon I just saw. And as I was preparing questions for this interview, I came upon Sebastian Bach's video he posted on YouTube. He's blown away by the book. Did you see this video yet?
Oh, did I see it? Well, I gave him the book maybe 2 weeks ago, and then he didn't get back to me right away. And, Sebastian is definitely dominantly featured in the book. We have a lot of history together. And he's a true rock fan, so I really I appreciate any criticism on the book. He's a reader too. So I call him up like a week and a half later. I said, "Did you get the book?" And he goes, "Yeah, it's just sitting on my table. Me and my wife are looking at it. We're waiting for the right time." I'm like, "Oh my, it sounds so Sebastian."
Yeah.
So I just kind of forgot about it. And then just a week ago, he's like, "Go on to Facebook Live. I'm putting the video on. It's hysterical, I go on there and I check it out with everyone for the first time, and he just did this whole unveiling, and it was awesome. And then a few days after that, he sent me a text in the morning, and he sent me this really heartfelt text saying how blown away he was by the words and how well put together it was, and how there was no typos even. He's very detailed. And at the end of the book, I put a Polaroid of us that one of the first times I met him, and I put that in the back with a little sentiment to him.
That's cool.
Yeah, and then it's getting 5,000 views a day. It's crazy.
He definitely comes off as a genuine fan. I mean, he is a rock star, but he's a fan of rock music too.
Yeah, no doubt.
He writes, "Mark Weiss has been my friend since 1987. I have read pretty much every rock and roll biography there is worth reading, and you never know what to expect when you pick up a new book. Well, let me tell you, Mark Weiss has raised the bar for rock and roll books with The Decade That Rocked. Mark has always been at the top of his field, and the level of detail and quality put into this book is the ultimate testament to his rock and roll photographic legacy." Not a bad referral from the man himself.
It's blown away. Good guy. He's very articulate, and he's one of the rockers that lasted all these decades.
Yep. Hell of a voice, man. One of the best in rock.
No doubt.
So you write in your book that you got your first camera when you were 13, and you fell in love with photography in 8th grade while you were in school in your hometown of, it's Matawan, New Jersey, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Matawan.
And it was a lawn mowing business that led you to getting your first camera. It was in exchange for mowing a neighbor's lawn for the summer, and then soon after that, you're sneaking into concerts. What was the very first concert you got into, and where was it?
It was Elton John at Madison Square Garden, and John Lennon actually showed up at the end. It was Thanksgiving Eve, and I just stuck my camera in and went there with my friends. I snuck out of Thanksgiving dinner, and we hopped on a train and got some tickets, and I just brought my camera in for the first time. And I just took a few pictures from the seat where we were, which was really far back. It's the only photo in the book that's kind of I'm not going to say it's a moment that I shot, and it was important that I put it in the book. But it was, everyone looked really small, and I just realized after that one shot that I needed to get closer because either needed a long lens, which I couldn't afford, or I needed to get within 10 feet of the stage. And then the next show I went to was Clapton. My brother brought me to a concert in Nessa Coliseum, and he got really good seats, 10th row seats. And then I had a telephoto lens, and I got that shot of Clapton in there. So I knew the trick was to get close to the show.
Every artist remembers the first time they heard their song on the radio. When was the first time you saw one of your photos in a magazine? What was that like? Was it for Circus?
Yeah, the first picture was a centerfold of Steven Tyler. Okay. I was, still sneaking in, and there wasn't a lot of pictures of Aerosmith, and I developed a relationship with the office. I met them after I got arrested for a Kiss concert. I went and saw the art director, and I went back 4 months later when they needed some Aerosmith photos, and I happened to have them, dropped them off, and 2 months later there was a centerfold of Steven Tyler. I remember I was in New York City and phone booth, and I talked to the secretary at Circus. She said, go to the newsstand. And I did right there, and there it was, and looked right at my name, and it was the biggest picture in the magazine. And then there was a picture of Ted Nugent also. And that was really the beginning of my career.
Talk about those Steven Tyler shots. In general, just getting your camera into those shows, you nervous trying to get in?
I get nervous when I go through the security guard, and they kind of pat you down, and I always have a way to hide everything. I dismantle my camera. I put a lens. I used to wear Fry boots. Fry boots are these big, thick boots you can put things in. So I put the lens in one and film in the other, and had the camera wrapped around my neck backwards. So I got everything in. So that's the part where I got nervous. Sure. And then once I'm in, you just got to get close, and then you get what you get, and then it's exciting. You're a fan. You're in the crowd with the moment, and that's it. I grabbed the shots and sent them to the magazine, and they used them.
That's cool. So what was your first quote-unquote official shoot then?
The one that I remember that really meant a lot to me was Van Halen in 1979 at Convention Hall in Asbury Park. I started submitting to Circus, and they were using a lot of my photos from that concert and others. Considered a freelance, like all the other photographers. They get $25 for a black and white and $100 for a color. And I did that. I got my name in the magazine, and then they started sending me out on assignments. The Police was at the Bottom Line, 78, I think, or 79. And then the Babies. That music, I liked it. I was into the moment, because I had the photo pass. But when I saw Van Halen in 79, it's it blew me away. And, I love Aerosmith and Ted Nugent and Led Zeppelin. And when I saw Van Halen, I saw the future, and I wanted more of that. And I met the band backstage, developed a relationship with them, and then all the other bands started coming around. AC/DC, Scorpions. It just snowballed into where it is today.
Sure. And as a photographer, I don't think there's a better band than Van Halen to shoot, especially during the David Lee era.
I mean, they were so photogenic, and they were fun, and the light show and the clothes. You can't beat it for a photographer to do a shoot with those guys.
And there's a great story you tell about David Lee Roth and a kite.
Yeah, it was. They hired me for a few days to go take photos, and I was told by the publicist to just whatever the guys wanted to do. And David would always want to take photographs, so I would have a background set up backstage and go in the dressing room, and he would be, warming up. He always put on a show for me or for the photographer. And then the next day, I got a call, and he said, come on out to the courtyard, take some photos. I'm like, oh, cool, yeah. So I went out there, and I see David flying a kite, and I'm just watching him fly the kite. And he keeps looking over his shoulder, I guess, to see if I was going to start taking pictures. And I just figured he was flying his kite, and I wanted to wait and see what he wanted me to do. And he's like, what are you doing, Mark? Start taking pictures. So I started taking pictures, and that's what he wanted me to do. He just wanted to, and he had a cigarette in his mouth, and it was just kind of funny seeing David flying a kite in a grassy area with the tour buses all around, no one else there. And then it got caught in the tree, and he's climbing up on his security's shoulder. And so I'm just grabbing all that. And that's what he wanted. I mean, we did other photos around too, in front of the trucks and things like that. But that was definitely out of character. And being a photographer, those are the kind of moments you kind of live for. You'll love to capture.
Yeah, that looks. I'm just looking at it. That's 82. Am I guessing right on the year, or 83?
Yeah, 82, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask, is there one band or artist in particular that stands out the most for you, and why? Is it Van Halen, or is there another artist or band?
I mean, I would say as a band, definitely Van Halen. I would say, I'd say all the way around Van Halen. I mean, the four different personalities, you put them all together and you got a rock and roll band they kind of set the pace for the rest of the decade. I mean, I should take that back. I should say Mötley Crüe.
Okay.
Mötley Crüe was there, the funnest guys. Photo shoots, on the road, backstage. I would say Mötley Crüe for sure.
Is there a band or artist you didn't get to photograph that you wish you could have? Because you did a bunch. I can't imagine there is, but maybe there is.
Not in the 80s. I mean, being from the 70s, going to shows, I mean, I would always love to got to know and toured with like the Stones or Zeppelin. But aside from that, the bands that came out in the 80s, I pretty much hit them all, really. Yeah.
One of my first music memories, Christmas morning, 1984, my older brother bought me Twisted Sister's Stay Hungry, and there on the cover was that iconic shot of Dee Snider holding that big old bone in his hand, and that was a photo you took. In fact, that was your very first album photo shoot. If you could talk about that a little bit.
I was just shooting magazine covers and, going on tour with bands. I really didn't do any album covers yet, but I always wanted to. I was always, when I was a kid, everyone looked at the album covers and I just wanted to do it. So I got a call and from the management of Twisted Sister. They said they wanted you, a rock photographer, and met with the band. We talked on the phone. Mark Mendoza had an idea for Stay Hungry, and I had that set built. My dad was in construction, so he helped me. It was in my studio in New York, and we spent 22 hours. We did group photos during the whole day, but it really wasn't kind of catching it. I wasn't getting the vibe that really was going to portray the cover. The idea was to have the five guys without makeup sitting around this table, which ended up being the back cover. And then we were going to have them in full, makeup and their persona, and then have them put together in this one room. They didn't have Photoshop, but, put them together. And because the room was so small, and it wasn't that small, it was about 10 foot by 10 foot, but you put 10 people in there and there's obstacles in the way. There was like a light bulb in the middle of it, and they couldn't make it work. Plus, I wasn't really, it's hard to get five guys to be all on the same page and really give it to me. And a couple of the guys were like clowning around a lot, and it was a detailed shoot and I needed like full cooperation, which I wasn't really getting. And then at the end of this 22-hour photo shoot, I asked Dee I said, does anyone want to do any individuals? And at that point, everyone wanted to leave. So Dee said, I'll stick around. So he stuck around for like one more roll of film. And at the last frame on that 36 roll frame, we got that last shot. And I sent everything to the record company. I didn't know what they were going to do. And that was the shot that they ended up using, which actually started a lot of friction with the band because it was supposed to be a band photo. Dee was doing everything at that point. He was, writing all his ideas, and he was the face of Twisted Sister. And the idea was not to have him on the cover. It was to have a band photo. So there was a lot of animosity between me and the band that I found out later on. I didn't really know it until later that they did have some animosity to me. And it almost had some effect on the band's longevity. They didn't break up, because of me. There was other reasons, but, when I shot them, they were at their strongest. Everyone kind of said, all right, this is what we're going to do. Dee's on the cover. We're going to roll with it. And they got success. And how could they not embrace what, the fame that they were getting and the success? Yeah. So they did go with it, but there was some animosity for sure.
Do you still talk to the surviving members of the band?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
I just had a live stream event a few weeks ago. My good friends, Tom and David from Megadeth, the bass player for Megadeth, has a "Oh Say Can You Stream" series, and I was on the first one and the second one. And the second one, Dee came in and we talked about the Stay Hungry album cover. And then just on Saturday, on the 30th of May, we did one just dedicated to my book, and I had like over 35 of my friends that were in the book, and we just did a live stream. So we had Zach on, and we had Eddie and JJ and a bunch of other people.
Cool.
And that was a fun night. But so, yeah, we're all pretty close.
Where did that bone come from that Dee's holding?
I got it at the what was it, like a butcher shop down the street from my studio. And, I picked that up like a week before the shoot. And by the time the guys got there, it like really stunk.
Yeah.
And no one wanted to touch it. And no one did touch it until that last roll of film. And Dee just grabbed it and he started like going nuts, going crazy in the studio. And this was like 4 or 5 in the morning. The cops even came there. Is everything okay in there? Because he was making noises. It was quite a scene.
Yeah, but he ended up doing morning radio around here. I'm in Connecticut, so he had a good run here on a morning show in Hartford, Connecticut for a while. And
yeah, he reinvented himself several times over.
Yep.
I mean, I remember when things weren't going so good in the early 90s. They were delivering newspapers and not doing good at all. And then everything got turned around when that Steel concert that he trunked together for the 9/11. They had a foundation.
Yeah, that was the New York Steel benefit concert. Yeah,
it sparked it up, and the guys got back, and it was good timing. They needed a break. I mean, they were one of the first bands that didn't ride out the 80s. Come Out and Play didn't do great, and then Love Us for Suckers didn't do so good, and then there was some friction with the bands and with the band members. So, their time, if they kept it together, until the end of the decade, they could have been bigger. Or, sometimes if you're away 10 years or 8, 9 years and you come back, it's kind of refreshing, where none of the other 80s bands really came back because they rode out that wave of the 80s to the end. And so it was too early for them. But those guys it was kind of the perfect storm for them to come back.
Yeah, I remember Joe Elliott talking about that for Def Leppard, saying that people would tell him, you guys should just break up or just say you're broken up so that way you can have a big comeback. But it just wasn't their thing. I mean, every band has their own decisions they make. And if you stick around long enough, it just seems like all these bands come back around, which, with the Crüe, Poison, Def Leppard tour is a big example. There's still an audience for it.
It's never been stronger, really, for the 80s. There really isn't a decade that didn't last, the test of time and being as strong as they are in all levels, from club bands and, a lot of the bands are just doing clubs, but, a lot of them are doing theaters and arenas and stadiums now.
Yep. Another interesting album cover story is Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet from 1986. I remember reading a few years back that the cover we see was not the cover initially planned. It turns out that what we see was a last-minute decision. You were pressed to come up with an idea and fast, and you came up big.
Well, yeah, the album was called Wanted Dead or Alive first, so we went and they grew beards, and we did a couple shoots in Vancouver with them kind of in a hideout, kind of Billy the Kid kind of gang kind of thing, and then they just decided to change it midstream, and they came up with Slippery When Wet, the title. They play off the sign and the sexual innuendos. And when they got back from Vancouver, we did a photo shoot by Bradley Beach by John's apartment that he was renting, and just got all the guys together. We did this like car wash scene. We got the shirts made, girlfriends, got some girls from the beach, and then we just did a photo shoot. And after that, we decided that was kind of where we wanted to go. And then I took one of the girls that was the girl in the middle with the real big breasts, Angela, and we brought her to my studio and put up a blue background so it looked like it was outdoors, and got some soap and water and cut up the shirt really good. And we actually dyed the shirt yellow and turned it into the cover, and that was the cover up until everyone got cold feet, mainly because of the PMRC was coming down, and they knew they had a great record, but they didn't want to put this image out and possibly jeopardize, because they were getting some feedback from the record company and the distributors that this might hold back the placement of the records, so they didn't want that. And then the final hour, John came over. It was his idea. He came over. He just asked me he said, I'm coming over. If we don't get it in tomorrow, we're going to miss the release date, and then we're screwed. So he came over, had no idea what intentions. He said, make sure you have a black plastic bag. I said, okay. I got my garbage bag out. He came there. He said, hang it up on the wall and spray some water on it. And he just wrote with his finger, Slippery When Wet. And then he left. I said, do you want to wait for the Polaroid? He's like, no, just take it and send it to the record company tomorrow. It's done. And that was the story of Slippery When Wet.
That's awesome. Well, the 80s, a great decade, and you lived through it. You know, if you get a kid that comes up to you and asks you, what was the 80s like? Well, what do you tell them?
Watch the dirt.
Yeah.
You know, that's what it was like 24/7. With me, I was on the road with all the different bands. So I would go from, you know, everyone had their own way of doing things, but it's pretty much kind of, you know, I was be out with Mötley, then I'd go with Rat, Ozzy, you know, whoever, for a couple of weeks at a time. So I was always like, I wasn't on the whole tour. So whenever I showed up, I was like a fresh face and like, oh, Weiss is here. And it's kind of like, you know, it's like a new bit of energy for him. And I would just follow whatever they did. I would sleep on their bunks. I would travel with them and party with them and everything else.
Did you get any sleep during that decade?
Probably not. Yeah. It's funny. I would always like get my little cat naps in everywhere. Anywhere I was, I would pass out. And whether it was like I was sitting up or lying down, I would catch a little 10, 15 minutes every once in a while. So like looking back at my photographs, I see photos of the bands taking my camera and shooting me. There was this one shot that's in my book when I was out with Great White. Actually, I wasn't out with Great White. It was when we were home, and Jack Russell invited me on his boat. We went fishing, and I just lied down to get some rays, and I just passed out, lack of sleep, you know. And the next week, I developed the film, and they're like putting fish in my face, and you know, he's like clowning around, and so one of those photos are in the book. It's kind of funny. I used to sleep with my mouth open, so this fish is like almost in my mouth.
That's great. Well, I mean, aside from the, you know, just the crazy, you know, the partying and all that stuff too, you have, I would assume you have to be always ready, you know, with the camera nearby. If one of those guys say, hey man, let's, you know, this is the perfect time to get a shot. Let's go. Right.
Well, it was always, they never asked me to take photos.
Okay.
I mean, David was an exception, but I would be there, have my cameras, and I would just, you know, whenever I saw a moment that was, you know, appropriate, or even if not, you know, those ones stay in the files. But, you know, it's just whatever. It really was a free for all for me. Whatever I wanted to do, they let me do. They gave me the access. I knew when not to. If the band were like having a discussion, you know, and I'm not going to take pictures. You know, they're in the heat of the moment and they're having a heavy discussion about something, whether it was about, you know, that was my girl or that was or something silly as like, you know, the guest list. You know, I just knew when to do that. It's kind of a no-brainer. So they trusted me. They let me be around and do what I do. And when I took a photo, and you know, a lot of times I don't even pay attention to what they're saying, and I'll just see some action with their hands moving or whatever, and I would just pick up the camera, and they'd be in one of these discussions, and they would like look at me and say, Weiss, come on, not now. And okay, no problem.
Yeah. There's that famous story with Steven Tyler with the song Walk This Way, where he loses the lyrics in the cab. You know, is there any story like that with you where you had, you know, or something that you lost that?
Yep. It's in the Bon Jovi story.
It is? Okay.
Oh yeah. Worst situation I was ever at. Actually, there's two. Bon Jovi, we did this shoot in Vancouver. It was up in the mountains somewhere. It took us like an hour and a half to get there. It was raining. It was thundering. It was awful. You know, we had to sneak into it. I got generators, you know, we couldn't get a permission to get on it. So we had this big production. And then after we left, we packed up. I told my assistant, you got everything? Yeah, we got everything. We get back to the hotel and we couldn't find the film.
Oh.
And my assistant said, oh, I thought you got it. I'm like, dude, you're my assistant. You know, and I said, do you have everything? That means the film too. And we didn't have the film. So we drove back in the rain and thunder. We drove back an hour and a half, and we had the flashlights. We had to climb through the window, and thank the Lord it was there, because it was, you know, what am I going to say? You know, it would have been a nightmare.
Panic.
So I didn't even tell the band about it. So that's the other thing was I did a shoot with Poison for the Flesh and Blood. Right before Flesh and Blood, they wanted some photos in between. They weren't sure if they were going to go keep the glam look a little bit, because they were everyone was toning down, or they were going to go a little more, you know, street, you know, more like guns were going. So we did this photo shoot, and they were kind of prettied up, shot again all day. And then on the way home from, I was going to catch a plane. I stopped at Johnny Rockets. I thought to myself, because I had this bag of film, where's the film going to be safer, in my car or on me? And I said on me. So I had the bag of film. On the way back from eating, this car pulled over and kind of beat the crap out of my friend of mine, and had a pistol whipped them, and then
Wow.
we had guns in our face robbing us, and they took the bag of film. And the band was I told Brett about it afterwards. He said, "You okay? You okay?" I said, "Yeah." It's like, I feel bad. We just spent the whole day. He's like, "Don't worry, Mark. We'll do it again. It's okay as long as you're okay." And they got me a ticket back the next day and made sure I was home safe. And I thought I was never hear from them again. But then a couple months go by and they say, "Hey, we're in Vancouver." I think it was Vancouver, somewhere in Canada. And we're recording, and we want you to come up just to do a real simple impromptu shoot for the back cover of the album and some press photos and things. And so I did. And I was, so those are my two stories.
And thankfully, both of them worked out. Everything worked out in the end.
I still, to this day, I wish that bag of 20 rolls of film that I had with Poison, that was gone. The next day, I put a $10,000 reward, because they said that they probably dumped it in a garbage dump. And I kind of described the bag and put notices around, if anyone sees this, as a reward. And unfortunately, no one came through with that.
Maybe it's out there somewhere.
Maybe someone has. That would be pretty crazy.
That'd be cool. So just to wrap things up, this book would make a killer Netflix movie. You talked about The Dirt. I mean, is that something you'd be into if that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always wanted do something kind of like that. And I feel like it's got the structure of a movie, where all the incidents that I was involved in, plus other ones, because, movies have a little bit of, poetic license to make a little things up and things like that. So I feel like with the structure of the book and what I did and how I weaved in and out of all these rock stars' lives, I feel like it could definitely be something put together. And that's kind of like, after maybe in 2 or 3 years, I'm going to start trying to do that.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. Because it's not just an amazing book of photos. It tells a story. And, who better than you? I mean, you were there to tell the story of all these great artists, and just this era that kids now in their teens and 20s, they weren't there for it, so it's like I wasn't around for the late 60s and early 70s, and I always wonder what it was like, and you live through the stories that those who were there told of it, and it really would be a great movie. I hope it happens for you, man. I'd be watching it. Well, sure.
In the meantime, I just released on my YouTube channel, The Decade That Rocked, the Weissguy. I was in a movie last year with my friend Troy, who directed, Troy Burbank, who directed and wrote and produced and acted in it. And he asked me to do a cameo. It's about 5 guys from the 80s that never grew up. And it's like a romantic comedy, but it also involves rock and roll and going to strip clubs. And they asked me to do a cameo just in the diner, Mark Weiss, and, just a little bit of back and forth. And we tied me into that, and we took clips from there, and we kind of turned it into a spin-off into a show called the Weissguy. Oh, cool. And it's only like 12 minutes right now, but we were just about to shoot some flashback scenes, because everyone loves the 80s flashback. So we're going to do flashback scene of the 2 of those guys, Creeper and Jesse, who were, maybe 7 or 8 years younger than me, and then me in the 80s. So they'll be like, 17, 16, and I'll be like 22, 23, and we'll just kind of bring ourselves back in that decade of how they were back then. And basically, they stalked me. They're like fanboys. And so it's kind of like a cat and mouse game.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah, it's The Decade That Rocked is the YouTube channel. It's called the Weissguy. So, okay. Yeah, check it out for sure.
Yeah, so just go to YouTube, look up that channel, The Decade That Rocked. Okay. Yeah, I look for that. Yeah. By the way, where'd you get that nickname, Weissguy? Who came up with that?
Mick Mars. We were on the bus, the Mötley bus, and I was the first time I went on, and Nikki brought me on, and Tommy Lee was in the driver's side, and he kind of like stopped me from going any further. And then Tommy grabbed me, and then Nikki started biting me, and he has this thing called draw blood, and he basically bit me until I bled, and then I had to bite him back, and I kind of wasn't going there, and started, after a few shots of Jack Daniels that they gave me to ease the pain, I I bit Nikki back. And a long story short, after the bottle of Jack was gone, I was watching Three Stooges with Mick Mars, and how one of the guys goes goes, "Hey, Weissguy."
Yeah.
And that's when Mick said that to me, and then that became my name. They started calling me on that tour, and then when I went back and had my first photo layout in Faces on that tour, they put in Weissguy in parentheses, and then it kind of stuck.
And it stuck. Wow. The Decade That Rocked, the photography of Mark Weissguy Weiss. It's out now through the website, thedecadethatrocked.com. Where can fans reach out to you, Mark? On Facebook, Twitter?
I have Twitter, Mark Weissguy, I think it is. I don't even know. I'm just starting to use Twitter now again.
Yeah.
I know it's important, but I have the YouTube channel, The Decade That Rocked. I also have Mark Weissguy on Facebook. And I also have The Decade That Rocked on Instagram and Facebook, which I'm really pushing fans to go there. I'm just building the brand, and I have a bunch of followers. I'm a photographer, but I wanted to celebrate with my photographs the music and the decade, and not just a photographer. So I'm kind of switching things over to have everyone go to The Decade That Rocked. And it's really all about me, but I also put other album covers up that aren't mine, and other content. It's not all 100% Mark Weiss, and just to get a community of people to just embrace that decade. Yeah. And it's from 1980 to 1990. That's all my photos go on that from that era. Mark Weiss Photography I have on Facebook too. It has everything from the 70s and today, and whatever I have. It's a little bit more of a wide range of what I'm up to.
And you still work regularly? I mean, I know the touring business right now is shut down, but
it's not really money in rock and roll photography, but I created a website called Rock Scene Magazine, which is a magazine I worked for when I was a teenager, just for really only a couple assignments, but I always loved that magazine. And I have I've actually relaunched it. I have all the old classic magazines from the 70s, not the 80s, because it did turn into, I think they sold the magazine in the 70s to the 80s, and it turned into more of like a circus magazine, like a pop rock mag. But I embraced the 70s part of it. So that's kind of like the archive on it. And then whenever I do a new shoot, whatever genre, as long as it's rock, it could be punk rock, heavy metal rock, thrash rock. As long as it's rock, I would post shoots that I would do, whether it's live, backstage. And it just gives me a place to put my photographs on and have the bands can see it there with a little bit of copy, some captions, and just so fans can go there and look at it and have a place for me to put my photographs instead of just a photo on Facebook here and there. It's a body of work. I kind of took a back seat to it when I started getting more involved in my book, when I was going towards the launch of this and finaling it up, because it's really a lot of work. But I am looking for photographers that want to carry the torch, and shoot new rock bands or whatever they want. I mean, so if there's any photographers interested in, wanting to be part of a rock scene, and, could even help them get some access, they have to be good and they have to know what they're doing. But I can guide them a bit. It's like an intern program. You got to just I wouldn't pay. I haven't monetized it. So it's got to be a true love and passion, just like I had in the beginning. I didn't care if I made a penny. Yeah. And then you have a place to show something that, hey, look, I have some pictures in rock scene, check it out. And then they could approach other publicists. So, it could help out some photographers that aren't sure what they want to do.
Yeah, that's awesome that you're reaching out to them, because who better to learn from than you? And I know a Father's Day is coming up soon, and your dad had an impact on you. He gave you some great advice about it's not just being a great photographer, but also just, make a great impression, right?
Yeah, my father was a door-to-door salesman, aluminum siding. He ended up, he came over from Hungary as a kid. He didn't go to college, and he just made himself into this, self-made person that created his own company and taught me, how to deal with people. What's important to look at them in their eyes and make them feel like they want you. So I learned a lot from my dad. And then my mother was in public relations. She used to write for newspapers, and she was a publicist for a hospital and Weight Watchers and all these different, She had all these different public relations jobs. And so And she was a real go-getter and very energetic and not shy. So I learned from her on that part of it. So I'm definitely a mix of both parents for sure, like most kids are.
That's cool, man. Well, thanks, Mark, so much for stopping by the podcast, and congratulations on a great book.
Thanks. And if you can go to the site, like you said in the beginning, I am selling like signed books on my site. They're available on Amazon as well. But I do offer like signed and postcards and shirts and bundles with photos. So, check them both out and decide what works for you.
Awesome. Mark, thanks so much again for being here, and continued success on the book, The Decade That Rocked, The Photography of Mark Weissguy Weiss. It is out now. That's it for this episode of Discovery. You can find Discovery on Facebook at facebook.com/The Discovery Podcast Home. Send us an email to thediscoverypodcast@gmail.com. Also, be sure to subscribe to the show on Spreaker or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And if you like the podcast and want to help out, share it on social media or just by word of mouth. Plus, a 5-star review on iTunes is another great way to push the podcast. Definitely appreciate all the support you've given and for listening. I'm Eric Senich. Join me next time for another brand new episode of Discovery.